and welcome to episode number 9 of Not Another Demo. I am joined, as always, by Anthony, Lloyd, and Aaron from Cloud Security Alliance here in West Michigan. We're really thrilled this week to be speaking with some folks from QOMPLX. I'm going to let them do an introduction of themselves, and then we're going to dive right in. So, Christian, if you want to go ahead and get the introduction started, then we'll have a fun conversation.
Absolutely. Thanks, Matt. My name is Christian Mory. I'm the Enterprise Sales Manager covering the Mid-Atlantic and the Midwest for QOMPLX in our manufacturing, healthcare, e-commerce, and law industry verticals. And then joining me is 2 members of our sales engineering team who I'll let introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Tudor James, and I work out of the UK near London, and I look after Europe and APAC.
And my name is Brian Freedman, and I cover the rest of the world from a sales engineering perspective. So if Tudor's not there, I fly in.
I just want that on a business card, rest of the world. That's great. So Brian, let me pose this question to you. It's one of the first questions that we really always start. And again, for everyone that's watching, you know, Not Another Demo is really our attempt at having a real open, honest, non-marketing, non-PowerPoint, non-acronym driven conversation with a vendor. So Brian, in a time where folks are being inundated with requests for meetings, their calendars are more full than they ever have been. Can you explain a little bit as to why someone that's listening to this should get a hold of you guys and spend an hour talking with QOMPLX?
Yeah, I think we bring a fairly unique solution to the environment, or to the industry, in an area that's really outside of typical cybersecurity centers spend. Today, everyone, especially in a time of COVID, I hate bringing up COVID talking points, everyone's been focusing on perimeter, VPN, EDR, endpoint detect and respond, antivirus solutions. I'm working on it.
Well done, man. He's quick to get.
Trying to remember this, right? It's hard to avoid the acronym soup, and especially in this field.
Yeah.
But everyone does spend money on those things, right? And historically, every stock manager who assumes a role or wants to build something out for an environment or be a new security practitioner, they know I'm going to buy, 5 or so technologies, regardless of who the vendor might be. They know I need a firewall, I need an antivirus. Depending on organization, I might have an endpoint detect and response solution. Maybe I'll have encryption, DLP. Actually, I don't remember what DLP actually stands for.
Data loss prevention.
Data loss prevention. And a PAM or a privilege authentication manager solution. Something like that is generally what you'll see in a stack, right? Maybe an ID intrusion detection system or something like that, right? In there as well. But those are all designed to identify either vulnerabilities or identify attacks as they're occurring, right? So I know you've spoken to antivirus or endpoint detect and respond vendors in the past, and they're always chasing what is the next piece of malware, okay, or the next vulnerability, or how can I identify where my outside-in risk might be, right? I have something unpatched, a new CVE is released, things like that I want to be able to know about, right? Which is all well and good. I'll never tell someone to avoid it. But when it comes down to it, as these attacks progress into your organization, they will happen because no one's going to guarantee you 100% coverage in any one area. These attacks all start attacking Active Directory. Because if you look at the kill chain and how it was designed as people move from reconnaissance, weaponization, installation, command and control, and then action on objective, in order to take an action on objective, you have to have some sort of credentialed access inside of the environment. That may be a computer account, a user account, some sort of service entity, even that's like a sudo, a root, or an admin shell, right? You have to be credentialed to do that. And then in order to get closer to your objective, whether it's I really want to cause damage and ransom or encrypt all the drives, I may want to escalate up into admin, right? But you need to attack Active Directory to do so to grant you those rights. Or you need to pivot and move closer to maybe, maybe you're trying to attack developer data because you want secret sauce for whatever the company has, or maybe you're interested in financial information. So you want to laterally move based on shared access rights, permissions, ACLs, access control lists into someone might be closer to that trove that you're looking for. So you'll do a silver ticket based attack. And this is really where we come in, and we're guarding Active Directory by monitoring the Kerberos Protocol. Now, a little bit of background, Kerberos Protocol is what Microsoft uses to help provide that authentication mechanism inside Windows-based environments. So anything, really, almost any enterprise today functions off Active Directory in some form in a Windows environment. And Kerberos was built in the 90s by MIT, and it was built functionally to be able to provide auth via a series of session keys in untrusted networks. And what we do is we actually monitor this protocol and be able to define and build out this ledger of saying, I expect these 6 steps of a handshake to occur over time. And if I don't see these things occur, then I know something's amiss. And depending on what that might be, I can alert based on a couple different attacks. But regardless of how good someone may forge a ticket, right, or forge a request, if I steal something from memory, or I'm copying the exact environmental configs that an organization might use for ticket length or IP address, or maybe something may be hidden behind DHCP. So we can actually do things and know, regardless of those values, that something's on, because we're actually focusing on the protocol, going down in the layers, in a time where other vendors are actually focusing up. They're using things like data modeling, AI, analytics, et cetera. And I'm not going to disparage those techs because I think they're very valuable, especially in today when the volume of data security practitioners deal with is just growing exponentially. And you need to be able to do that statistical analysis to be able to identify outliers to really do your job in any really sense. There's no way any analyst is being able to functionally evaluate Windows event logs as it streams to them and able to pull out the bad. You need to be able to do these rules and analysis to know what's going on. And it's all well and good, but things can slip through. Things are not as easily discernible, or it's hard to find that minute difference, right? If it's not that big of an outlier, how do you know if it's 1 point out of your bounds versus 20 points outside your bounds, right? And that's not going to denotate how bad something is either. So
the first question that comes to mind, sorry to interrupt, is
fine.
where does your product sit architecturally? Are you sitting in line with Active Directory and monitoring all those tickets in real time? And then, what mechanisms do you have for prevention, or are you purely just alerting on these things as they happen?
So we actually sit on domain controllers, and I fondly say that our agents are quite dumb, right? Because domain controllers tend to not be over allocated resources. People generally don't grant them a plethora of CPU or memory or storage. So we actually keep the agent very, very light. So it's the equivalent if you were to run Wireshark and then look over at, do a packet capture and look at your Kerberos traffic. That's the same data we use for evaluation. We also do a subset of Windows event logs as well. There's some attacks like pass the ticket, pass the hash, Kerberosing, where you do want to view a certain set of Windows event logs. Kerberosing is a good example of that as well. And so we'll sit there and ingest logs and information that way. When it comes to action, we're very, very focused on alerting. And the reason for this is prevention is difficult to do, especially in the off space. If you are in antivirus, malware prevention, those types of domains, it's really easy to say, I don't want to let file run or execute, right? Or I want to do a built-in responsive stop process if you had an endpoint detect and response solution in there. When we're dealing with accounts and identities, though, I have no idea, or business context, know if this account, which could be string, what is the implication if I were to disable that account or lock it out or remove it? Is it tied to some sort of process or revenue generating operation? So without that business context, it's hard to do preventative measures appropriately and in a safe way. So we focus heavily on how I can rapidly alert the SOC and then tie in to existing tool sets. We really don't displace really much out there, but really feed the alert quickly into whatever tool you might be using for SIM, and then allowing analysts to research, view Kerberos metadata, and then make an appropriate decision on action from whatever orchestration tool you might have.
Two-part question for you.
Yeah.
One, can you just a super brief summary for those of us that don't know a lot about Kerberos? And then what are some of the trends you're seeing right now as we see attackers they're almost going back in time, and some of the attacks that recently weren't successful, but they were in the past, like people have forgotten about them. What trends are you seeing?
So first, the Kerberos component. Kerberos is the core of what Microsoft uses to provide authentication. And it was designed to provide security over unsecure networks. So it's a series of handshakes of hello, how are you? Come back, I want a ticket. then prove your identity, and I'm going to grant you, you're going to request what resource you want access to, and I'm going to validate that, and they'll grant you access to resource. And so it all separates all these into a series of around 6 steps. And so what we're actually doing is recreating this ledger on our database, and then saying, if I see step 1 and 2 skipped, and I only see step 3 appear outside of in the ledger, I know it's a golden ticket. If I see a service request for a client ticket, I know that it's now going to be a lateral movement attack, a silver ticket request, and I can block or I can alert on that behavior. In terms of general trends, right? So what the issue you kind of bring up is really something we see in malware a lot. Malware has a very repetitive or cyclical nature, around 5 to 7 years of where they rehash new malware. And that's really kind of a function of what can you detect on and how much you can store on a signature list. You see a lot of these stories from vendors like SentinelOne, CrowdStrike, Silence. They'll talk about how people tend to do this. And this really is something we see for McAfee Sophos who have signature-based components to them. When it comes to auth, though, it's a little bit different. These attacks are, the evolution of them is not really that frequent in that realm, right? Being able to replicate domain controllers or sync into something else, or replicate your changes into an existing DC versus lateral movement of the protocol are all been fairly static for the most part. Now, there's certainly a whole slew of attacks around that, right? We've seen a huge evolution in the derivatives of pass the hash and how hashes might be stored. And there's also as a prevalence of technology like Okta that does SAML assertion, right? How do we monitor and protect with those technologies in place as well? Especially as people do more hybrid environments and extend identity into cloud, right? So you have Azure AD, for example, right? And so there's a really big change in auth, but it's all designed. It also functions at its core off of I'm still evaluating against an Active Directory and I'm presenting a key pair. So it's both evolving, but also staying true to its core in a number of different ways.
Is that kind of tricky though when you're working on kind of like advanced UEBA, user endpoint behavior analytics? I almost got myself in trouble with that one.
We've had a couple of those where it's like, oh, and then you go, oh, that's why we do the acronym, because that's a horrible bunch of words put together.
Yes.
And what I mean by that is, it seems like if you only have certain things to alert on, is it possible that the bad guys can almost like do misdirects now? So have you seen instances where they're trying to fake it's the silver ticket and then they're really doing golden, or vice versa? Am I just kind of butchering that one?
No, it's not butchering. I understand where you're going, right? There's definitely in other realms of security where people do misdirects a lot of the time, right? I mean, if you think about live off the land style of attacks where it's auto compilation, people think you're downloading an image, but that image has embedded macros to then pull code, which they compile via a Java codex that's embedded in a Word document, right? People do misdirections all the time inside attacks. But this kind of goes back to the point I was making of how we function at such a low level of source and the actual protocol behavior. When you're dealing at a protocol layer security, kind of what we are, the steps are very regimented. It's hard to break out of that steps, right? You have to do things in that specific order because the protocol demands it. And to go outside of that, that's where our alerting is, right? Because you've exempted yourself by doing something outside the bounds of that protocol. Right. A good example of this is think you're going to the coffee shop, or how you used to go to the coffee shop, right? If you a Unity any behavior will monitor behavior of that coffee shop, right? It observes the system of customer comes in, they hand the money to the cashier, say I want a black coffee, take the coffee, they sit down, read the newspaper, and then leave, right? That's their behavior and expects it, right? And it's going to be monitoring that behavior over time, right? So I know you always get your black coffee. You're always going to sit, you're going to read the Washington Post or whatever your newspaper might be, stay there for 25 minutes, then you walk out of the store and leave. And that's the system, right? But there's a protocol that's also involved in here too, right? If the behavior analytics solution comes and monitors you, right, in a new scenario, You come in, you present the money. The lady behind the cashier takes the money, puts it in her pocket. She still gives you your pastry and your coffee. You still sit, you read. The system that's observing you has no way to know, is this correct or not, right? It just says that's the normal balance. It's actually normal for the cashier to place the money in her pocket versus the money in the till. So how do you identify that outlier behavior if that's all it's observed in the system? And this is kind of a problem you read inside of UBI. You end up baselining an attacker's behavior inside of your baseline, and then to find derivatives of that is difficult, right? And this is why we focus on the protocol, right? So regardless of what store you walk in, right? You can walk into Toys R Us, Best Buy, Circuit City. I know I'm naming things that don't exist anymore.
I'm okay with that. We're going back in time today.
Right, but regardless of where you go into, you're going to select product, you're going to present money to cashier, cashier will place money into till, and then you will receive receipt and you walk out of the store. I know that is the protocol you're going to follow. Now, you may spend 30 minutes shopping, or you may sit around for 45 minutes reading your newspaper, doing something different, but that doesn't matter because you're still following protocol, right?
Yeah,
and so this is really the kind
steps,
of
right? So
right.
you know that whether, you know, to your point, whether it's an hour or 30 minutes, this has to be the next step in the process.
Okay. Right, and this is how we're functioning. So when I make references to us going down, right, this is kind of what I'm talking about, focusing at fundamentals when other technologies go up. Now, both are well and good, right? If I'm trying to identify who's casing the joint, right, I'm going to look for the guy who's sitting with his newspaper for 6 hours, and that's a very good example of, right, this guy shouldn't be at the bank lobby for 6 hours. No one's at the bank for 6 hours, right? You don't do that, right? So, and that's where that technology has a very good and very relevant value in our space. But when you're trying to find authentication-based activity, this is where protocol is very valuable. So you need both, honestly. And this is why I never dissuade a SOC manager to say, don't buy EDR or endpoint detector sign, don't buy behavior analytics solutions. They're good and valuable in their place, but there's also in certain cases where protocol evaluation is going to be very powerful as well.
Should I say the thing, Matt? Defense in depth.
So I actually have a pretty good, so I have a good
Mm-hmm.
analogy about this defense in depth scenario, right? And people also call it the castle-based approach, right? Enterprises as a whole, and I speak in a lot of analogies here, but enterprises as a whole, they work on building up their castle. So they're going to do big deep moat, extra crocodiles, alligators, depending on where you are geographically, extra fire, moats, etc. Right? Think of anything like Game of Thrones-esque castle, right? But authentication and identity is the drawbridge, and domain controllers is that knight who's saying, okay, you're allowed to cross versus you're not allowed to cross, right? And when it's just Kerberos, right, and it's just you're not securing that point, that knight, that identity manager is effective as, you know, your local bouncer at your favorite college town on game night. If you have an 18 plus ID, come in for penny pitchers, right? I mean, it's not you, you're definitely not that person, but it's an identity and it works and it's legitimate, right? Even though you stole it from your older brother or whatever, it doesn't matter. And we're here to shore up that night, to shore up that evaluation. I know that these credentials don't belong to you. They're not yours. They're actually over here. You didn't go follow the process to get them. And so this is when I say that we actually don't really displace much. We actually bolster a lot of different techs in there, right? So we bolster things like PAM. We bolster encryption technology. We bolster things like, whatever DLP stands for again. I'm sorry, I don't remember.
Data loss prevention.
Data loss prevention, right? Because people aren't coming in with false identities, and we can make those technologies stronger. So even things like Okta, who does SAML assertion, we actually prevent golden attacks, which can affect things like Okta. So I would actually say we actually position a lot more technologies to be a little bit stronger in their capabilities with us in place.
Now for the $1 million question that you may or may not be able to help out with, but it'll be interesting if you guys or you or tutor or somebody can talk about the insurance side. So we're seeing a plethora of obviously ransomware attacks. Let me rephrase that. Ransom attacks haven't stopped. They've just gotten either more press because they're getting bigger. They have different kinds of targets. Can your solution help with that? So
are you tying it into insurance? Because
well, yeah, that's the second part. I want to see your answer to the first part, because I do know that QOMPLX helps with risk management and insurance like that, but I don't want to make sure I smush the subjects.
So I might be smushing here with my response here. I don't want insurance, audit, assessment, right, are all various components of there, because and there's a huge, there's a whole field of actuary science around how do I assign, evaluate, and then insure against risk. There is a component of our business that does that will do actual outside of the product physically, right, what we have and sell, that will do actually evaluations of external risk factors that we'll monitor. We'll look and scan you from the outside. And these are all service offerings we do have, right? Look at your program. We'll look from outside in, so doing open source intelligence scans of your environment, and be able to look and monitor and define and assign risk values to you, and then use that to justify insurance premiums. But also, it allows you to do the converse from the business side of saying, as I improve those postures, as I improve gaps that might have been identified, that should qualify me for lower and lower rates. So you can actually make market improvements in your insurance liabilities. And that's kind of where the complex insurance side of the house functions. So it's not really tied into directly into the AD solution that we offer and we've been mostly talking about today, but it is a component of what Complex as a whole does.
So the second part of that question, and why I was trying to it was a leading question, sorry, is
You can see who has the real podcast in this group, right?
you guys can chime in at any moment. I just finished a ransomware podcast like 5 days ago, so I got so much information in my head right now. So with your insurance part, are you starting to see trends emerge? And what I mean by that is, it seems to be there's a lot of money being paid out that wasn't before, right? So you had a situation where the difference between a breach and ransomware. Let me go to that. So obviously, breach, it happens. There's nothing you can do after the fact. That you have the cleanup, you have the investigation. Insurance companies send their people in there to kind of take a look at everything. Hey, do they have complex or they don't? And then it always comes down to that scoring level. Did they do due diligence? Did they do all they could? And then obviously with the Catholic Care system a couple of years ago, they weren't even doing, MVP. And then the insurance companies had their clause in there that they're not paying. Fast forward a couple of years from now it's a situation where these companies are with the ransomware attack, they're going to the hook of, hey, this is business continuity. We have that clause in there. You don't have time to go look and see whether it was our fault or not. We need you to pay this ransomware like right now. And then their companies are having to do that. Are you guys seeing anything on your insurance side of your company to where it's going to change trends? Because I'm hearing numbers. We'll never know the actual number, right? But I'm hearing a B word, right? Like by the end of this year, like $1 billion in ransomware is paid off. Unfortunately, I can't get any hard numbers because nobody will go on the record for telling me anything. But I think it's going to make the insurance companies kind of come back around and think about utilizing tools, maybe like Complex and others. Like, you have to do this. Are you seeing that already happening, or it's still kind of new? And then the insurance side in risk, they haven't settled on anything yet.
So we're definitely seeing that behavior, and that is kind of the direction that our insurance cyber house and I'll be upfront, on my side, we're really not heavily involved in that. So, but that's kind of really the goal of Complex, the insurance side, right? It's to be able to assign risk values and use that to help reduce risk overall, and then be able to have tangible dollar value benefits of that around risk advisory and then payout, right? And no one wants to talk about, where you failed, right? Which is essentially what we say about that. We're seeing people more and more adopt that type of methodology of how we can improve that and then lower risk around it. It's a fascinating subject area, and maybe we want to talk about it in a different podcast, because I think you really could do a whole nother one series about it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I know the tricky part is on the record and off the record, right?
Yeah, and being a part of the cyber group, we could get the guys from the insurance group to speak a little bit more in depth about it.
Would they get excited though? I guess this is just like your question for you or Tutor. Like, do they not get to talk to people a lot? So, I mean, you guys are like the face, so to speak. Do they get excited, or do they get nervous when they're like, "What do you mean I have to talk to someone?"
They actually talk to quite a bit of people, I would say. I mean, especially on the Tutor side of the world, the UK office is doing a massive amount of insurance work over there. We're actually quite popular on that side. We just recently started bringing it stateside. So it's kind of funny how the cyber products more evolved on the state side. Well, insurance has kind of grown heavily in the UK side, but now we're kind of bridging the gap between the two entities.
So that leads me into something that I always like to talk about. So from my perspective in my my regular job, you know, I see companies, security companies especially, really living and dying on the customer engagement, both pre-sales and post-sales. You know, the long-term follow-ups and relationships that a company creates, you know, whether that's from the first meeting through the POC, through the purchase to 5 years down the road, ensuring that the product is being used correctly and all of that stuff. So I'll open it up to all of you guys. Can you tell our audience a little bit about what it's like interfacing with QOMPLX, what that process looks like, what, say, a proof of concept process would look like, and then maybe some post-sales engagement and what you guys do from that standpoint as well?
Yeah. So, I mean, initially you're going to talk to a beautiful face like Christian, and he's going to help you, and we'll scope out and work kind of, you know, explain value, where we sit, how we can help out, things like that, right? As we evolve through the POC process, we have a number of, or proof of concept process. You use that acronym.
I did it. That was me. Yeah, you're right.
Well, there's a number of different ways we can do this. So we offer what we call a cyber range. This is really just a self-hosted, we'll host it, small network, think domain controller, member server, and a workstation, where they can either run attacks that we'll provide. So we'll have Mimikatz or Rubius and things like that in there they can use. Or if they want, they could bring their own red team into the environment too, and then really kind of throw what they want at. The goal here is really to really test our claims of, can we stop, you know, authentication-based attacks, right? We'll define the success criteria. We'll bound it appropriately, right? We're not here to see that you can get past Microsoft Defender, right? A whole slew of technologies can do that, right? But we are here to see if you want to embed a hacker tool inside of a Docker container and then launch it against the DC to be able to pull certificates. Are you able to execute that without us knowing? Like, we're here to test those types of things in the range. So we test value. We have another option too.
Now that's, so just for clarity, sorry.
Yeah, no, fine.
So that's in kind of a separate test environment or whatever. So
yeah,
do you guys have the ability to do that in the proof of concept, say live or live-ish inside the, people probably don't want all of that stuff happening inside their production environment, but they may have a test or QA lab or something like that. I mean, do you guys go to that level, or is it pretty much always done in the?
We can. We certainly could do, and we call those pilots. So we can do that in a customer environment. Usually it's going to be a segmented off lab or some sort of environment like that for them. Yeah. But we actually see most customers actually just prefer the POC route because it's free, it's there, and it really does test the conceptual value of the technology. And with their red team signs off on it, it's usually pretty much a golden stamp for us. And so it's really free. But we have both options. It depends on the organization's appetite for and how they procure software. Some require it, some don't. It's different across the board. From a post-sales perspective, so we'll go through, you've agreed to purchase QOMPLX, right? From there, we have what we call a solutions delivery group. They're actually going to work with you for scoping how you want to deploy, how we want to do the log collection, making sure you're doing things in an efficient way with minimal impact to your network. We have assets like we call COMLIC appliances, which are simple log aggregators, and where we want to place it in your environment that's most effective with least issue. Price hasn't changed. This is all included in what we do every day. We'll get you stood up and we'll help build out any agreed upon detections or use cases you want. If you need any parsers, we assist with that as well. So now you're stood up, you're running, you have your detections, we verified, we are monitoring your network appropriately, nothing's gapped, and we're known good, right? So post-sale. The product is a SaaS-based solution, and just like most of them, they're fairly easy to manage. You're by no means required to have a full-time consultant advising you, right? On site or anything like that. We do offer MDR if you want someone to have screen eyes on glass the entire time. We can provide that if that's something you need. We let you run your own thing, and then of course we have a customer service, customer satisfaction arm of our business that will engage with customers at that point as well. So what they need and how we can help out. And we also have a whole pro serve division for our add-on services too. So things like scans, virtual CISO, process and procedures evaluations, you know, a nice little bullet menu of things they can add on if they want. By no means obligated to, but from a, it's a lot of good things in there. We have a really good depth of expertise on our bench, and something really depends on what customers want or need out of us.
Now these other three guys with me, all three work for companies that have too many people and not enough work to do. But for everyone, all the other companies out there that don't operate that way, can you talk a little bit? I mean, because when a company is looking at bringing in another technology or a new technology or another solution, there is always the question of, well, how much care and feeding and maintenance does this require on a daily basis? Do I need a full-time person to be running this? Or so can you talk a little bit about the workload involved in having this in your environment?
Yeah, I mean, I actually would argue workload will go down in your environment, purely from, and we'll hang our hat on a very high degree of accuracy when it comes to detections of things like golden tickets, silver tickets. All right. So if you're using competing technologies, you often have a high false positive rate, which is a massive operational expense from hours spent investigating those things, right? Because if you have a golden ticket, right, that's a break the glass scenario. An attacker has admin credentials. You have to stop every other investigation and focus purely on that first and close it out before you can go back to your day-to-day work. I would actually argue that we can reduce some costs from operationally expenses, because we're feeding very accurate alerts, and then when our alerts are coming with a high degree of fidelity, you know they're known to be true and they can be investigated given the due diligence they're actually needed. From there, though, it's from a maintenance perspective, it's fairly lightweight. People's domain controllers footprint really doesn't change heavily. There might be M&A activity where you might request additional help, but again, even then, it's still just instrumenting the domain controllers appropriately, and that's really it. I don't want to seem like the technology is overly simple, but also I don't want anyone to leave with the impression that you need a consultant full-time, right? And we can also interface with other groups too. I know a couple of you guys on this call might work with an organization that has MSSP offerings, right, or maybe outsource SOCs. We can feed these alerts into, you know, outside MSSPs and let them handle a response if that's something they would like to do too. So there's a lot of different ways we can slice and dice our capabilities to fit into what an organization might want or need.
So I guess somewhat to, or at least a similar topic. You know, there are some organizations out there that are fairly simple from an Active Directory standpoint, and then there are others that have very complex Active Directories or multiple forests, or are making mergers and acquisitions at an unprecedented rate. And are dealing with some of those complexities. So can you talk a little bit about your ability to handle, say, you know, a multi-forest, multi-domain type environment?
Not an issue. We have some very, very large customers. I don't know, Christian, if we can name drop any of them, but I would say it's safe to say that some of you guys might be using some of their laptops right now.
Large manufacturer, about 100,000 Active Directory users is the one he's talking about. But yeah, they've been running it for a while with no issues in a large globally distributed network.
So then if someone has, say, multi-forest environment, are they able to look at, are those separate instances of Complex? Are you guys able to pull all of that together and make sense out of, you know, maybe attacks across those forests?
Yep, we absolutely can just pull it all together. It's not, no one's granted multiple instances of Complex. You're certainly able to do filtered views based on domain if you want to do that type of stuff and get that analytics and, as part of the console and the investigation. So you can do those things, but we can absorb that data, no problem.
Okay. Good stuff.
So what from the customer, you know, there's always two sides to this story. So I think people tend to get a little quick to blame the vendor when the implementation doesn't work. So what are some things the customer can bring to the table to help prepare, you know, for bringing this into their environment?
I think the same things that any vendor could really ask for, which would be a good understanding of your network topology and also your assets. You wouldn't believe how many times I would go in and find out that customers don't know all their domain controllers or where they are. and honestly, it's a lot of that upkeep and record tracking that, some organizations kind of fall a little bit short on, which can happen with turnover in IT and who's managing and how they like to manage, from spreadsheets to CMDB databases, right? So that's really the biggest things we ask for. We do have some support and the ability to do kind of this domain controller discovery if we need to and identify those gaps. But other than that, that's really all we kind of ask for. A method for change too is the other good one too, right? What's the process for putting an agent on the domain controller, right? Do you have a process where I can have a change window to appropriately take something down, install an agent, bring it back up? Or how are you doing and monitoring changes in your own environment would be the other option too. But that's really it. Nothing too complicated.
Yeah, nothing like going in thinking you're going to get some work done and then realize that the domain controller change policy is 30 days or something like that, right? So
well, there's a little bit of time that's going to be built into the implementation too, right? Because every ticket granted by a domain controller has a certain key length, right? And you have to wait for those to cycle through for us to be able to accurately detect things. So between regions, between offices, between maybe subsidiaries or whatever you have, the implementation does take a little bit just because of breadth and because of cycling out these keys. So that's really no big deal though. From an implementation standpoint, it's very easy to work with and very well understood from a customer base.
Well, because that's kind of Lloyd's question is kind of important, right? Because some of the scenarios you talked about earlier, you can't stress the importance of that baseline, right? Because like you said, I love that analogy. I'm gonna have to use it sometime. Sorry, but the whole,
that's fine.
The coffee shop thing, right? Like if your baseline has that cashier every third transaction putting money in her pocket, that's a baseline, right? Like how are you gonna know that that's bad?
Right. So. Exactly.
Good stuff. Well, I'm looking at the clock here, and it looks like we're kind of running up against time. So with that, QOMPLX guys, I really appreciate you joining us today. I think we learned some stuff, and as always, had a great conversation. So I really appreciate you guys being a part of this. For everyone out there that's watching, as always, please like, subscribe, share, all the cool kid YouTube stuff.
Yeah, at least you didn't say, go ahead and smash that button.
Yeah, right there, that one. Hit that button right there. No, I'm not one of the cool kids.
Are we on Twitch? I want to make sure are we on Twitch?
Yeah.
I don't even know what that means. So I'll tell you something.
No, this was good. I appreciate the Kerberos because I have a friend that's a security architect, and I keep meaning to ask him that question. I always forget. So now I know what Kerberos is because I think I got that one wrong on my GSEC certification.
And no acronyms were harmed in the making of this episode.
Yeah,
well, we did good. So,
thank you,
all right.
John.
Well, again, thanks everybody for watching, and we will see you again for episode 10.